Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's webinar, Ace the Culture Fit interview with Brad Agri. Brad has presented for us in the past. He's been a great presenter, so you're definitely in for a good webinar. So before I introduce Brad, I would like to go over a few logistical items. My name is Maciej Godlewski, by the way, and I'm with Ivy Exec. We have muted everybody just to preserve the audio quality. But don't worry, as always, you'll be able to ask questions in the questions box as well as in the chat box. I'll be monitoring them, and then at the end of the webinar, we're going to have a Q&A session. So, Brad will be able to answer your questions. If we don't get to them, don't worry. Brad has volunteered to provide answers to your questions as well. So keep them coming. We'll be able to make sure we answer all of them as well. At the end of the webinar, in about a day or two, we're going to send you a recording of this video and audio, as well as the slide deck. So you get a link to it. You'll be able to see both the video and the slide deck. Also, we'll include a survey in there, so please give us any feedback about how we can make the webinars as successful and as useful to you as possible. So those are logistical items. And with that, I just want to introduce Brad quickly. So tonight's presenter, Brad Agri, he's a founding principal of Career Team Partners, a New York City career management consulting firm. He's a seasoned career coach and has worked for over 15 years with individuals in a number of industries, helping them both assess and actualize career paths. He also serves in the capacity of executive coach, work with people who are essentially happy in their current job situations, but are looking to be more productive and better leaders. Another thing to note is that he has been retained by Columbia Business School to coach MBA and executive MBA students in leadership skills as part of the school's ongoing program for social intelligence. He also holds an MBA from Columbia as well. So with that, I'm just going to hand it over to Brad.
Thank you very much, Maciej. It's good to be back with you all, and good to have you all on the webinar. When I put together this presentation, it's interesting. I looked at the title, "Ace the Culture Fit Interview." It occurred to me that perhaps this should really be "Ace the Culture Fit Interviews," plural. For in fact, as we know, there is not just one interview that gets you the job based upon culture, but that it's an ongoing process. And what I hope tonight to do is to really sort of unpack the whole issue of culture and fit and have you understand the components of it and how you can understand from your point of view what a potential employer might be looking for and the challenges they have in terms of actually understanding what they're looking for. By way of agenda, I'm going to spend a little time just talking about culture and some of the issues that it poses in terms of being so subjective. And then a little bit about, before we even talk about you selling yourselves to companies to be a fit, a little bit about knowing what I call the you and knowing the they and knowing the us. And I'll get into this a little later, but really understanding what your needs are and what you perceive theirs are and seeing if there is a match. I also want to spend a little time just looking at the issue of work-life balance. And then I'll spend some time talking about types of fit. There are lots of different types of fit, and this is an area that I've become interested in some of my work, organizational development, about different ways people can work better together. So we'll look at that and then have you understand how you can, when you're interviewing, actually uncover what the culture is of where you are interviewing, but how best to position yourself to be seen as someone that would be right to work there. And then finally at the end, just a little kind of checklist that I put together, something that I found very helpful. While the focus of tonight certainly is about understanding you fitting, there's a little focus about if, and hopefully you get an offer, making sure it's right for you. It's kind of a checklist to see if the congruence is working for you. So many of us work hard to get an offer, and we don't do the kind of due diligence that is needed to make sure that we want to, in fact, say yes to what is being offered to us. So the hiring hurdle, if you know, in traditional career management, we talk about the three things that you need to show to someone to get hired, and most of this is fairly straightforward to many of you seasoned interviewers, but it's you have the skills to do the job, meaning you can actually prove through your past resume and through your references that you can do it, that you actually want to do the job. And then this third kind of subjective thing is you're a good cultural fit with the hiring organization. So what are some of the challenges around this third item? Well, the problem is, of course, it is very subjective. It's the hardest, if you put yourself in the position of the person hiring, often the hardest to determine and the hardest to articulate. If you were to ask 3 or 4 people of the hiring side what exactly were some of those, you know, characteristics of leadership or personality issues they're looking for, how hard for them to exactly agree upon exactly what they're looking for. So it is subjective, and it's important for both the interviewer and the interview yourself to be able to gauge. You know, I have a lot of friends in recruiting, and the big joke is they always say, well, you know, the HR person will give me a very long list of specs about how many years experience and needs for skills, and then they'll kind of tack on some personality issues. And often it comes down to them not really being able to articulate what they want, and they'll say, well, I don't know, just keep sending me people and I'll tell you what I like when I see it. All kidding aside, it is a subjective process, and when you think about it, usually hiring someone comes down to many of these people getting together and trying to reach a consensus. So we're also dealing with bias. So again, something very hard to put a science around, and something that we need to really approach more as an art. So what are the big questions? Well, certainly from the hiring side, does this candidate, does personality, the values, their attitudes, their energy, their work style match that of the organization? Does, in fact, from our hiring side, we want, from a human capital point of view, we want people that are going to fit in. We certainly don't want, say, a group of Morgan Stanley clones or a group of Citibank clones. We want people who are bring something to the table, but who are going to complement the culture. So again, it's that tricky area of finding complementarity, but not exactly, you know, a line-by-line checklist of exactly the same kinds of attributes. The problem becomes, as I just mentioned, that many of the people don't know what the example are is what they need and what they can claim to have as kind of a need for attitudes and good matches. So there's a difference between what they say and what they really need, and it's really unclear if they know what they're looking for. So they may say they want one thing, but they may not really know. There may be a difference between what is stated corporate culture and what is needed for one particular position. So that they may say one thing and there may be a complete change of heart. I've done some work with some OD people, and what I found is that the Department of Statistics says that across multiple industries, 81% of the time people leave because of lack of fit, whereas only 11% of the time it's because they can't do the job. And this speaks volumes to the fact that mistakes are made on both sides and that can be avoided. They don't necessarily have to be mistakes made, but think of the high cost that's associated with having to rehire and reinitiate recruiting. And think of all the issues that go around bringing someone in and training them and not having the right person. So it really speaks volumes to not just seeing that the person can do the job. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the personal factors to consider, and this is what I'm calling sort of the me of the whole equation. It may seem pretty obvious to most of us, but look inside to see what is your identity, what are your personality, your values, your emotions, your style. Now this, certainly our identities are fairly consistent, but what is happening with you in terms of your career and where you are and what you need is, in fact, do you have a good sense of what that is and what you need from the person that's interviewing you. And then there's the they. How do I perceive this firm's culture, both formal and informal, meaning what is stated, what I can find out from public information, from talking to people, but more informally when I get into that room, when I start talking to people and interviewing people, what am I going to find out that really makes sense in terms of who works well here, who gets promoted, who is going to be successful. So, and then just what is their history, what is their reputation, how do they do work. So there's always this yin and yang between what is publicly available and then what you can find out once you get inside. And clearly there's always some difference between the two. So we've looked at the me and we've looked at the they. Now let's look at the we. And if you think about this, this could be sort of two concentric circles with the overlap. And the two parts of this are, from my point of view, are my needs being met, but from their point of view, are they being able, with my work and my abilities, to, can I make a difference for them? So it's, again, seeing if there's a match. And it's a balancing act, because when you think about it, none of us are going to act exactly the way we are in all parts of our lives. We all have certain roles we play at home and in the world, and there are certain corporate roles that we're required to play. However, we need to look at gradations. And if you think about it, if there's too much of me, think about it, if you're in a place, and let's say you have been hired and they've made a mistake, and they've hired you, and you get there and you are a maverick, an outsider, someone who goes against the grain. Well, this may be good for them in terms of bringing some new thinking and some new talent, but it may not be so great for you as someone who's going to thrive in that environment. By the same token, if it's too much they, it's going to be, well, where's my identity here? I'm swallowed up. I'm undifferentiated. I'm not making a difference. I'm just like every other investment banker here, or every other trader. I'm just going through it. There's really no chance for me to do anything differently. So the point is recognizing how much of this you can tolerate, and really only you're going to know the optimal level of tolerance. There's been a lot written about work-life balance, and that could be a whole other webinar, but what I will say about this is have a solid sense of where your priorities are, both at home and work or in other parts of your life right now. Recognize that these may shift over time. There may be a point right now where personally things are very quiet and you're in a building mode for your career, and you want to work extra hours and you want to travel. There may be other times when this is not the case. So recognize what you need and what your boundaries are, both from a time point of view and also a psychic point of view, meaning how much of it are you if you're away on a weekend, are you at work in your head and not with your family? So look at this, and I will use an example of a lawyer I'm working with who is going from a typically billable hour kind of situation where she's working zillions of hours, and she's working now for a nonprofit 3 days a week. She's got to set boundaries, and she's got to find out, and she did, in interviewing for this job that there was a match between a flexible place that allowed her 3 days a week and that respected this. Only by discussing these kinds of things would they be able to determine this as both employer and employee. The definition is pretty straightforward. It's a healthy overlap between our identities and those of our organizations. Again, too much overlap, you feel like work is encroaching on your personal life, there is no time for anything else. And then there's the other, ironically enough, equally stressful, although different kind of overlap, which is there's not enough. You don't feel fulfilled. It's empty, it's rote, it's boring. It's, you know, how do I get through the day? I had an internship during business school where I was hired for 3 months to do a project for an HR consulting job, and I knew within the first 2 weeks that I could basically do it in about 10 days, and I had to stretch it out over 3 months. How awful to feel like just going through the motions of having to get through each day. So again, I would have liked more work, and there wasn't much to be found. There's an expression I read about this through actually some work at University of Pennsylvania has been done on this, and actually some of this work has also been done, strangely enough, in the whole area of the ministry, where there's a whole issue of identities and vocations, and they talk about the sweet spot being an overlap between who I am and what I do are in harmony, meaning that we're coming to a situation where there's not that much differentiation. If there's a big gap between those two, it's going to hurt. It's going to feel like you're acting. It's going to feel like you're having to put on different emotional faces, if you were. Certainly, in reality, this is going to involve compromise. We're not ever going to find 100% fit. What you're looking for from both points of view is that the two people are moving in the same direction. It may not be a perfect fit, but it's a place where that you're looking to the same situation. And again, I'll offer an example of a client who took a job. Again, you think about during his interviews, everyone is on their best behavior. Neither side, employer or employee, really fully researched this whole fit thing, and this company rewarded almost espionage, and I'm being a little bit overly dramatic, but they would hire two people specifically to find one to beat the other out. That was their politics. And so little did this person know that part of this whole game would be that they probably would not have a job in 2 years. Would they have known this before? Would they have taken this job? Certainly not. You know, would they be forced to be politicking all day and spend all their time trying to get around other people? No. So again, an example of a fit that went wrong. So let's shift now to actually talking about congruence or fit. And these definitions, congruence is the quality or state of agreeing or coinciding. And fit is degrees of closeness between two surfaces. Now, they may sound similar, and they are, but the point that I want to make is congruence is much more macro. It's looking at the bigger picture, whereas fit can be almost a sub-segment of congruence. There can be different types of fit within an organization, and I'll get to some of the specific types in a minute, but it can be looking on smaller dimensions. So there are different lenses for looking at how closely things ally. There are a number of types of fit, and again, what's interesting to do is a lot of this stuff I had never heard of too, but it's interesting to have this as kind of an index so that when you're interviewing, you're aware of how you're fitting, and you may be aware of how they're evaluating you on various things, they meaning the employer. The first one, which is typically the starting point for most of the employers are your skills in matching the job requirements. And P in all cases refers to person, by the way. So person job. Then there's a person boss. This might be the fit between the boss that you're interviewing with. Undoubtedly, you're probably going to interview with your superior or superiors, or even dotted line representations of bosses. So some sense of, are the styles in line? Is there a chemistry here? PS, fit between individual and staff, depending on how big a group you're managing, how big a department, how that's perceived. Again, hopefully you'll get some sense of this during the interview process and get some sense of if it's working and if your styles align. PG would be fit between the group, the individual. This would be between other groups you might work with, say other departments or clients, other people that you come in contact with. And then the other part that's interesting is a PO, which is a fit between the individual and the demands of the occupation. It's very intriguing because often people may be interviewing for a job and they've been interviewing in an industry. I've seen time and time again where some interviews, there are these epiphanies that occur where the person is just saying, I do not want to interview for one more CFO job. I do not. It's just, and whatever triggers it, that can make a big difference, certainly in terms of whether they're going to be happy doing this job. It often comes out of the blue, but it's often something, again, I go back to the ministry where people feel like this is something they've done their whole life and they realize that it's really not going to be their calling anymore. At this point, I just want to encourage you, Maciej has said about posting questions, and please, I know we're not face-to-face. It's hard to respond to your questions, but I want to make sure that you continue to log in and to post any kind of questions you have. As he mentioned, at the end, hopefully we'll cover some of them, most of them. If not, I'm happy to respond to them. Again, this is a very sort of subjective kind of, not always two-word answer kind of topic. So I just wanted to interject that as we're speaking here. So we go back to fit, and we look at all these different indices, and we realize that if you look at all these sort of individual fits, it's no surprise that the biggest and best predictor of success, of course, is the fit between the person and the environment, which is kind of the macro. There may be, for instance, in interviewing, other dimensions that are less than ideal. It may be that you're perceiving, oh, I really don't want to work with that boss, but that won't be forever, or we may have a different client. But if in fact there is a problem where you ultimately don't fit, it's going to lead to the usual spiral of unhappiness, lack of productivity, some absenteeism, and possible termination. So some things you can weather, but if you're not a fit overall, it's going to be a problem. And the sooner you know this, the better. And the sooner that the client, as much as they can glean this when they're talking to you, the client meaning the hiring agency, the person, the better. I will use my own career as an example. I worked for Citibank for 7 years in the credit card division, and during the interview process, I don't think either of us, either interviewer or interviewee, spent enough time on this third topic. We went through a headhunter. They wanted an advertising person. It all matched up, but there was very little time spent around what's it like to work at Citibank, very little time them assessing whether I'd be happy. They said, oh, he's worked for an agency, he can handle stress, he can handle changes. So everyone was kind of on their best behavior, which is one of the real issues with interviews. And I got there, and I was massively unhappy. I had probably in 7 years, I probably had 11 bosses, And I kept thinking it's going to get better. The PB, the person boss, is going to get better, or the PC, the client, that's going to get better. So all these minor fits, I thought, this is going to get better, these are going to improve, and there would be periods of improvement, and there would be periods where it would get better, but then it would go back to me being unhappy, me feeling like I'm not getting promoted, something's going wrong. No surprise, from the very beginning, the PE, the environment, had been a problem, and I didn't want to admit it. I wanted to say that I can work around it, when in fact, it's like a bad marriage. It wasn't meant to be. So better to know up front than to have other theories that really are only going to be temporary fixes. There are other types of fit that I just want to quickly tell you about, and this is just more for your information. But in terms of employers looking at you as a candidate, there are two ways that they're going to assess you. And there's subjective fit, which is using qualitative interviews as a way of gauging things like integrity and loyalty and flexibility, all the things that they want. And then there's actual fit, where they actually give standardized testing. What I found in my research and talking to people is that this second, that the actual first subjective fit continues to be the best and most reliable. The second, unfortunately, is not, just because it's costly and takes a long time, and how reliable it is to ask questions on things like values and get real answers is hard to really do. So the jury's out on that. But this is helpful for you to know, and what you will find in your interviews certainly is, just like in an interview where someone might give you a chance to talk about a skill or an example of something you've done using one of your skills, there may be opportunities where they may give you hypotheticals or case histories around judgment or around ethics or around dealing with difficult people. So you know, they can be creative and you can be creative in terms of giving examples to make them feel like that you're going to be a person that would fit where they are interviewing you for. Two other types are complementary fit and supplementary fit. And these are just ways that employers may seek to add a variety to their human capital, if you will, to their mix. Complementary fit, and you may unknowingly find yourself in this position, is where they're going to bring someone in who is maybe a different kind of client, maybe who has a different skill set, maybe who's worked in a different industry or country, who's going to kind of round out the organization, who's going to kind of bring something new to the party, and has enough commonality culturally, but is going to bring new skills. And then there's what they call a supplementary fit, which is a person that is pretty much like most of the people that work there. So it's going to reinforce what I call their corporate ethos, but it's going to allow some room for experimentation. There's going to be some, because people are coming from the same page, as it were, there's some chance as a group to try some new things with a certain amount of a safety net. So it's just important to know these kinds of fits that they may be looking for. Now, they may not name them in this nomenclature that I'm talking about, but it's the more you can know about what they may be looking for, the better. And that is a good segue into how you find out about their culture. Now, what I'm talking about is interesting because the old model in recruiting used to be that hiring companies would spend a lot of time filtering through resumes. Now it's online, looking for the yes, no, maybe piles, the people that can do the job and want to do the job. And a lot of time is spent on those first three things I showed you on the slide about people that can do it, and then get them in to find out if they want to do the job. And what would happen is the icing on the cake was kind of, oh, and are they a good fit? So they would bring it to a group of finalists, and then they'd say, okay, let's get the microscope out and sort of, you know, have them go to lunch with some of the partners and have them meet some of the people and see if they're a fit. Well, that whole thing has changed now. They can't afford to wait to the end. There are too many people that can fulfill 1 and 2. And in fact, they're looking for all three from the very beginning of the evaluation process, from the very beginning when you walk in the door. So it's up to you to be able to prove this, all three of these things consistently throughout the process. Sources of information, and this is mostly before, and this is fairly straightforward, certainly public information about the company, people that you may know within the company of the department, or subsidiaries or other organizations that may interact with them, say. And then opinions of the knowledgeable executive recruiters. This could be, if you are certainly going through a recruiter, what they think, but also which proves the point of staying in contact with recruiters as a network, is people who are friends who are recruiters who might be able to say, kind of on the QT, what do you know about so-and-so? What kind of people do they hire? You know, what is their trend be? You know, these people that place people for a living are often the people who get into these nuanced kind of fit situations, and they often become kind of the fit brokers, if you will. So getting to know recruiters, I think, is very helpful to understand what people are looking for, and because they do this for a living, they have a good sense. So I guess I'm just saying that's a good group to start networking with if you haven't already. So what is your mission? Well, it's a couple of things. First of all, it's to uncover early on information about their culture. You want to understand the most you can about their culture, what they're made up of, who succeeds. Then you want to weave into your conversations how you fit these profiles and these needs. At the same time, you do not want to neglect, again, proving these two other things, that you can do the job and that you're capable of doing the job and that you want to do the job. So it's a bit of a balancing game and a bit of art, because before it was just like, I can do the job, I want to do the job, hire me. And now it's much more weaving that in, but at the same time gleaning information about how they work and how you would work well with them, and if they're a cross-functional kind of company, how you would be the best for that, or if they're a company that involves lots of new business development, thinking on your feet, how you would work for them. So you're having to really prove these three things continuously. Certainly the first two you're going to have to get nailed in terms of being able to move forward, but don't forget, every interviewer needs to hear all three of these things, because at some point they're going to get together and they're going to decide upon you. These are just sample questions, and again, I'm going to ask you to be a judge of when you would use these. Maybe some you wouldn't. Maybe some you would ask more of junior people, more you would ask of people where you're at a different point in the interview. You have to be the judge of when best to ask these. But things like, how would you certainly define the culture here? What type of people have you seen thriving here? When you personally came here, was it the same or different than you expected? How? What is the pace like here? How does work get done day to day? Tell me about the reward system. Again, you may not want to talk about compensation and about you know, getting fees and rewards immediately, but that may be something to ask about. What is your typical work schedule like? It's not saying, do you have to work weekends or do you have to travel? Just tell me about your week. So you're gleaning information about them. A lot of these questions, they may start, but remember, you're managing this interview, and if they don't ask them, you need to shine and show them how you best fit them. I like to think of it as what I call a consultative selling approach, like any person would do in selling in a soft sell situation, is to bring up the issue, ask for information, and then listen for the needs. And it's basically a need fulfillment, and then prove the fit example, and again, this is made up and probably not particularly realistic, but you had mentioned earlier that part of your culture was the expectation that people serve on cross-functional teams. Could you tell me more about that? So you've heard about that's come up, and you're thinking, and your light bulb goes off, and you say, that's interesting because that's something that I've done, and I want to be able to tell them a little about that. And they say, yes, we want a marketing person like yourself or somebody else to be risk takers in serving on teams where they may not be content experts. Oh, so they want someone that's willing to kind of go in and not know what they're doing and be able to learn from others. Well, I was charged with doing the same at X, where I basically had to rely upon my team building skills to get up to speed through the help of other technical experts. It stretched and challenged me immensely. Now you see how, again, you're getting more information about them, but it's not just your ability to do some skill. It's your ability to be a certain way, to act a certain way, to not be afraid of taking risks, to not be afraid of not knowing, things like that. So again, this is, I'm making this example up. I don't know whether someone would actually have this as part of their discussion, but it's a good way of seeing how you would uncover need. Other cultural cues, and again, pay attention to the demographics of the place, the energy, the layout if you're in the office, how people are interacting, how they're working. Could you see yourself, could you visualize yourself in a place like this? Could they see you there? The type of dress, all these other cues that are going to say to you, could I fit? Maybe not 100%, but enough to make me comfortable and enough to make them comfortable. So the rules. When you're talking about proving some of these things, your message needs to be authentic. Nothing worse than canned scripts, and we've all heard them before, using lots of big words and not really proving them, and well thought out and provable. So if you in fact show this demonstration for creativity or this demonstration for ethics, give examples of where you've been put in situations of having to make ethical decisions, or situations where you had to deal with conflict or deal with unpleasantness. So be able to prove it. What you need to remember is that every person from that very first screener right up until the person that's giving you the offer, you need to be consistent with what you tell each of them. And you need to reinforce it verbally and in written form. So it's a brand message. Again, it's meant to be, oh, I remember X person, and this is what I remember about them. This is kind of the stamp of their DNA. A warning. And this seems pretty obvious, but it's pretty unusual, and it does happen that there's going to be what I call a 100% slam dunk, where every single thing is going to line up absolutely perfectly, like the perfect marriage, where everything is totally on, the stars are aligned. Certainly they come close. But it may sound obvious, but I want to step back a bit and say, do not try to dramatically change your personality or your approach to please the recruiter. I've seen this time and time again of people, particularly in interviews where they want to get a call back and they're just telling me what I want to hear them. Especially I've done some recruiting with business school students, and it's, I don't want to hear a rote answer. I want to hear something about you that makes you different or that's going to put you apart. These canned scripts will come across as artificial and rehearsed. I like to think of it as stretching towards their culture without abandoning values and your established sense of identity. So I like to think of this as, I am this person, and there's enough of me that I can still keep my identity, but I can move towards this company directionally. I can work with them. I don't lose who I am. Remember I talked about me, we, and they. I can still be part of them without losing my identity. Most importantly, recognize the value of knowing up front a mismatch from either side may actually be a good thing. And I'm going to even say the word a blessing. certainly it's a numbers game. Certainly your job is to get an offer. Certainly many of us get offers with firms that we know we're going to turn down. But I will say that if you know absolutely that it is not a good match, it is better to know this ahead of time. This is a numbers game, and you're going to waste a lot of time on both sides if you know it's not a match. If it's a possibility, certainly go through it. But I think so many people try to think that every place is going to be someplace they want to work, and that's just not the truth or the reality. I teach a class in career management, and one of the things that always comes up is, you know, what do you do at the end? And by the end, usually in that context means the last meeting before you're going to talk turkey about compensation or you're going to talk about benefits. I want to say here, in the context of tonight, the end of every conversation is to be able to ask for the job, to express interest. Now, early on, you may not know exactly you want the job, but you want to ask to continue to find out more about the job. And you want to express interest in doing this. And you want to check for additional proof. So let's say I'm on my third callback. Don't wait until the very end to say, you know, okay, so that's it. Instead of saying something like, you know, do you need anything else from me in the way of materials, written materials, or do you need references, which they'll probably ask for? What about saying, is there anything else you need from my end to further demonstrate that I am the right fit for X? See how that's a much more zeroed in kind of question. It means sort of like, what else, you know, we've covered all this other stuff. What else do you need to know about me as a person? And I think many times you are actually, in a sense, cueing the other person that may not be as an astute an interviewer as you are an interviewee. So I think this is an interesting thing to try out and see, you know, what the response is. Before I turn it over back to Maciej, I just want to finish with a little bit about the congruence checklist I talked about. And this is what I referred to earlier on when I was talking about counter-interviewing, kind of like kicking the tires of the car that you've just been offered to make sure you want to drive it. So many times, I use my Citibank example. I did not spend enough time talking to people at my level to really find out what it was really like. Had I known that, and it applies to other jobs I've had, you spend so much time and energy going through the hoops. You have a right to spend time asking questions about them to see if the fit is right for you. Some of the stuff may be obvious, but there may be some really big things. I mean, in another case I had, I found out, and this was not really gone into detail, I spoke with a person that had the job before, who was a friend of a friend, and that made a big difference in terms of me turning something down. So 4 things to think about. Are my personal values aligned with where I'm interviewing? Will I be Essence? Will I be at home? Will I be able to function and grow there? Would my skills, abilities, gifts be used to their best at X? Am I being hired because I'm really a good rainmaker and that's all I'm going to get to do? They promised me all these other things, but I'm really going to just do that? Or do I think I'm really going to have the chance to use all these gifts or grow into using them? Is the vision of what I do at this job in sync with what the organization would support and encourage? And by this I mean, you know, certainly, is this an area of growth? What, you know, they may have asked me during the interview what I would envision me doing. Would this in fact take place? Would this make sense within the industry? Could it happen? And fundamentally, and more personally, and probably most importantly, would I feel connected and comfortable with coworkers? The whole idea of the maverick I talked about, certain people can deal with it, but most of us like to have some degree of socialization at work. and to feel connected. And there's nothing worse than being in a situation where you know within the first couple of days that you've made a bad mistake. I talked earlier about metrics when I was talking about some of the people that had done standardized tests to see if the candidate was right. Here's something to think about for you as the person that may be deciding if they take the job. And one way to think about it is something that I've sort of played with a little bit myself with some people, you know, which goes beyond just making sort of the list of pluses and minuses, is to look at each of those axes I talked about earlier, the PJ, the PB. As you're gone through those interviews, think, how did they all stack up? When you talk to that potential boss, how did that feel? Maybe if you were aware of what the clients were going to be like, what is your feel about that? So a sign of value of how important each of those fits are, and then rate kind of where you are on them. So if one is more important than the other, see how you kind of net out. And you can look at the high and low scores and see, you know, some strategic decisions, and then you can compare that whole thing to kind of the overall person environment fit. Sort of see if we look at this both in the aggregate and then we look at it both broken down, where does it net out? So that's just one way of looking at it. Again, not always appropriate. Not all those axes are going to be appropriate for every job, but I think a good way of looking at things differently as you interview. So just to summarize what we talked about tonight, we talked about corporate culture is obviously very subjective, hard to define and quantify. There's often a difference between formal and informal, and often our people that are even hiring us aren't sure what they want. We look to the fact that companies now want people that can do the job and want to, but that can really quickly integrate into their firms. They have enough on their plate to have to learn technically. They want people that are going to get along. The importance also of you as the person that's going in there to really uncover and get a sense of the culture early, so that the more you can find out, the better, and that the more information you have, the more you can tailor what you say about how you would be best working with them. Then we went into a little bit of talk about the different kinds of fit, and realizing that the best fit, of course, is the person environment, but these other factors are definitely things to consider and to look at and to evaluate. And then finally, just looking at candidates should be mindful if this is a place that they will be happy working at. We talked earlier about those statistics, and in most cases, it's about really finding a place separate from the salary, separate from the location, all these other things. Are you going to enjoy going to work every day? Thank you so much. And now I'm going to, here's just a little bit about me. And Mache is going to send you my regular email if you want to be in contact. This is my website. It's telling you a little about some of the work I do. And I will now turn it back to him for any kind of questions you guys may have.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Brad. Yes, so there are definitely a few questions, and we can just launch right into them. And if you have any questions as well, please feel free to send them along. So for example, John asked, if in an interview, how do you explain lack of fit regarding a previous position?
Oh, from where you've been before. I think one way to do that is to depending on how it's questioned, is to say perhaps what was the picture that was painted was perhaps different than what occurred when one got in there. I mean, if you use my example, a lot of times what I'll say about Citibank is I'll say that I learned quite a bit technically, but that it was not a place that I really thrived in politically. So I think being honest and being direct and keeping the answer fairly short.
Gotcha. Perfect. Also, another question we have is, should you reach out to people who have left the company to find out about the culture there?
Absolutely. It's a great idea. It's a great idea. If you know people, for whatever reason, what their experience has been there, the more networking you can do, the better, the more helpful it can be to to give you, and even though there may be differences in opinion, it at least can give you a flavor for what's happened there in terms of either, is it the kind of place where people stay and if you're okay there to make money for years and leave, that's fine, but that may not be you. So to understand that, definitely helpful, as long as it can be done, obviously, with confidentiality.
Gotcha, gotcha. Actually, a similar question to it, and maybe a follow-up, is who should you ask at the company the questions about company culture during the interview process? Would it be the potential boss or potential peers?
I think it could start just with your first screener, who may be an HR person, or even sometimes it's an HR person and the first person you may meet or whatever. I don't think it's an inappropriate question. I don't think you necessarily have to ask everyone, but I think it's, if you have a series of different meetings, you may want to get different takes on it from different people. What the HR person says may be very much kind of the, quote unquote formal answer. You may, in a callback, get asked to have lunch with someone at your level, which often happens, and that's a good opportunity to find out. Particularly that question that I mentioned about, was it different when you got there than what you have? May not be good for a senior person, but you don't know. It just depends on how much traction you've made in terms of gaining an intimacy with this person and a trust. So, but I think it's a good question. So certainly you could ask more than one person.
Mm-hmm. No, perfect, perfect. Also, do you have any tips on finding out finding out whether the interviewer is on their best behavior during the interview process?
I'm going to just have to interpret that, meaning are they telling the truth or are they kind of giving you a party line? I guess the thing I would say is don't be afraid if you get answers to questions that aren't complete or seem like they're lacking something. Do not be afraid to ask follow-up questions. Because best behavior to me means sort of giving you just what you need but not really telling the truth. So, you might probe a little bit more for information, or you might check that with somebody else.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And also another question, I guess a follow-up question. Turk asks, he's new to the city, he doesn't know anybody except the recruiters, and then those who will interview him are all senior. Would it be inappropriate or appropriate to ask to meet with some people at his level to gauge the fit of the role? And if it is, how and when should he ask for this opportunity?
I'm assuming that means is that they want to interview just with the senior people, but he wants to start with more junior people. I would say that I would follow the wishes of the senior people. There may be a better way of connecting informally with some junior people, but I would tend to follow the protocol of what they want to do.
Perfect.
It feels to me like you're maybe a little avoiding kind of the interview and sort of wanting to practice on other people. I would say certainly if they can contact other people that they can have an informal off-the-record conversation, but if they want you to meet the senior people, I think you have to go for it.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha, gotcha. He thanked you as well. But for another question that actually combines with another one that we had already. So Gail asks, how viable are the personality questionnaires that some companies use to screen candidates regarding how they would fit in their organization? But also we had a similar one about Myers-Briggs as well. So can you comment about those types of personality questionnaires?
Right. I'm not a statistician, so I'm only talking out of just my general knowledge. I think Myers-Briggs, and this again is one person's opinion, I think it's a helpful piece of information to have. It shows more about how you interact with the world and some of your interactions. I suppose it's a piece of information that's helpful, and I've heard of people administering that. My feel on it is that it gives just one piece of information. These tests I've read about are their agreement with different kinds of values. They've been used a lot by very senior people sometimes. And again, as I said earlier, I think the jury's out in terms of how reliable they are. Again, multiple choice. Are you answering the question that you want to hear? Am I answering the question so I give you the answer that's true or the one that you want to hear? So I think if it's something that can help from the employer's point of view, I think it's great. If you're asked to take them, certainly I would do it. I would place much more emphasis on really preparing for the face-to-face meetings, because you're going to get so much more rich information from everything from body language to how you think on your feet to poise, things that can't be measured, on a printout.
Gotcha. That's great. Also, Devendra asks, how to answer the question of what's making you leave your current employer?
I think, there's a number of different answers. I mean, I think being the most honest, if in fact you're looking for expanded opportunities, that's one thing. If it's a situation where there's been a downsizing, tell the truth. The other question about if it's been a mismatch, that's fine. I think the best thing is to tell the truth. If it's been a situation that's politically charged, I wouldn't over-explain, but turn the conversation to, when I worked at X pharmaceutical company, I realized that it was a mismatch, that I learned all these important things, but what I'm looking for now at a place like so-and-so is working more with teams, and I didn't realize there that it was much more solo work. And part of the reason I'm attracted to you all is blank. So answer the question, but steer it towards the future and less about the past. Because I think a lot of times when people want to comb through resumes, we get overly anxious and there's kind of blind spots that we want to over-explain. And I think the point is to certainly honor the question, explain it briefly, but then tie it to the future.
Great. That's a great answer. Is there a way to tailor your resume to help you in showing congruence with the company you're applying to?
I think that's really hard. I mean, unless you know a lot about the company ahead of time, I think that's hard. I mean, certainly, particularly maybe if you're going through a recruiter who may have some information on the company, and often I know recruiters kind of tweak resumes and change them a bit to reflect what they think the people might want. That's okay. Be careful, though, that if they tweak it, that it's something that you can sell from. Because I've seen a lot of people come to me in my business with resumes that are for the recruiter but not for them. In other words, they can't sell from them. So be careful not to sign off on them. But unless you have some kind of inside information, I think you're better to start with a standard resume as kind of your summary, and then what you say using that as a point of departure is going to be where you're going to prove fit. But I think it's going to be hard to do it before, because you're going to get so much information right on site.
Of course.
So it's hard to really know ahead of time.
Gotcha. Understood. What? We have some questions we actually still have to answer, but we're going to maybe take one or two more. But what about, should you trust employer review sites or the information that's out on the internet about the company?
You said employee review sites?
Sorry, employer review sites. Yep.
I think it's a piece of information to consider. Again, consider where it's coming from, and how that site may be monitored, and who's contributing to it, and it's just so hard when you don't have any context for where this is coming from. I think it's a piece of information to look at, but I think what I said earlier, I guess the person that mentioned about talking to people that left the company, or even people who left the company and for whatever reason, whether they were happy or whatever, I think you're going to get more from that kind of conversation particularly if it's through someone you know that you trust, where as a stranger, who knows what kind of vendetta they may have. I mean, I think it's a piece of information to consider, but I wouldn't, in my mind, put all my stock in that.
Gotcha.
Just like if you were going to a restaurant, you know, what you read about and what you hear about, two different decisions, and what you read in a book may have no semblance at all to what actually is occurring.
Got it. Maybe we can maybe just address maybe one more question. Do you think that company culture changes over time? For example, as the company grows, and then if it does, what to do if your priorities have changed over time? For example, after the interview process.
I definitely think so. I think particularly with mergers and with changes and with groups being eaten by other groups, definitely. I think that can happen. And I think that part of the whole coping mechanism is understanding that you know, you may have changed and you want more, or you may be the same and they're not in all the company. I mean, I know a friend of mine who was hired from a bank, that 5 different banks came together, and the identity of these 5 banks were like major strange bedfellows. And the bank that he was hired for no more resembled the bank that it had become, and he realized that it just wasn't going to work. And one thing I'll just quickly throw out, which I didn't really get to, but may be interesting to some people at some point for another presentation, is there's a whole movement of where if things change and they're still good enough, meaning that the corporate culture has changed, but you're still able to adapt within it. It's, say, not perfect, but it makes sense. There's a whole area called job crafting, which is about making your job more enriched and more applicable to what you want to do in the future. So that's one thing to think about, is one way of doing that.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much, Brad, and thank you everybody for coming tonight. We're actually just on time, so it's perfect. We'll make sure to get to all your questions as well afterwards too. So, just like to thank you, Brad, once again for giving a great presentation.
Thank you so much, and nice talking to you all this evening.
All right, have a good night, and see you on the next webinar.